Hello and welcome to the Publishing Now 21 Looking Forward webinar. I'm one of your co-hosts for today's webinar, Tyler Carey, the Chief Revenue Officer of Westchester Publishing Services, and I'm joined by Jim Milliot, the Editorial Director from Publishers Weekly. Just let's cover a quick housekeeping item about questions and answers on the next slide here. And then I'll introduce a little bit more about the webinar and toss it to Jim. So before we get started, your microphones will be muted during the webinar. If you have any questions at all at any time, feel free to enter them using the Q&A panel, not the chat box, but the Q&A panel. It should be at the bottom of your screen if you're on a computer, or towards the upper right if you're on an iPad or other mobile device. You can also engage via the Publishing Now 21 hashtag on social media. So just a little bit of background. Westchester Publishing Services, one of your co-hosts today, is a U.S. employee-owned company founded in 1969. We have offices around the world, and we're known for our editorial and production services that are used by publishers around the world, over 250 publishers and content providers. So we're really proud to co-host this second annual Publishing Now webinar, and I'll give a little bit of background. So we've been in business for over 50 years at Westchester Publishing Services, helping publishing companies and members of the publishing industry as varied as educational and ed tech vendors, trade publishers, government policy groups, university presses. During these 52 years, we've weathered many ups and downs in the economy, as have our clients. But the impact of the pandemic and the economic challenges of the past year, they created many new uncertainties regarding the supply chain for all of us and for the overall industry, which is why we felt it important to again gather a group of publishing thought leaders to address these concerns in this, our second annual webinar about the state of the publishing industry. So included amongst our panelists are three leaders from publishers that Westchester is fortunate enough to partner with, supporting each of them on different segments of their publications list. What I think is key to any vendor relationship is that each of these publishers have different types of products and different types of needs. So Westchester is proud to provide varying degrees of involvement and resources to address the editorial, production, and digital challenges of the publishing industry. So for many of our clients, these challenges have been amplified by the current factors impacting the industry. And I welcome the chance to speak with any of today's webinar attendees afterwards about how Westchester could help you. I also look forward to your feedback on today's webinar, which is supported by a number of standalone podcast episodes available on our website, westchesterpublishingservices.com. So thank you very much for coming. And over to you, Jim.
Thank you, Tyler. It's good to be back with you all. We do have a jam-packed panel, as you might imagine from the intro there. And the way this is going to work, I'm going to start in a couple of seconds here, giving kind of a very quick state of the industry, and then I will introduce our panelists. And when we get rolling, we'll just flow from one to another. So that is the way this is going to work. You know, through the first 3 months of 2021, things have gone, you know, pretty well. Units are up about 26%, according to NPD BookScan, and that's a reflection of the surge in book buying that began, you know, last year about this time, as well as some comparisons to a really bad March last year, which was probably the worst month in terms of sales, which started to pick up about this time last year. But there's still a lot of uncertainty in the year going forward. Those questions are a little bit different, and one is actually a little bit surprising. A number of publishers have been mentioning, you know, since the year 2020 was, you know, up about 8%, 10%, depending on, you know, what industry statistic you want to look at. Can they do that again? And one thing they've pointed to is how strong the second half of the year was. And can that continue when things start to reopen and, you know, people can go to restaurants and movies and concerts and that sort of thing? You know, will the interest in reading and book buying decline? So that's one thing people are looking at. And then discoverability is another thing that's high on people's agenda, caused by a couple of things. Last year, At PW, we had well over 500 titles that had been moved from spring 2020, either to fall 2021 or into fall 2020 or 2021 in general. So that could create a bit of a glut. And the other thing about discoverability has been, as the amount of buying has moved online, we all know that the difficulties that consumers have finding new titles in particular, or titles that they haven't gone looking for online. So that's something you'll hear about in a couple of minutes from our panelists. And in a quick plug for a PW US book show, which we will be holding May 25th to May 27th, intended to be a very small virtual replacement for Book Expo, which, as I'm sure everybody knows, is not happening anymore, or at least this year. And we started this to address a lot of questions we were getting from publicists saying, how are we going to promote and get some buzz for our books in the fall? That's one thing we've come up with. And again, I think you'll hear a little bit more about that when we begin in earnest here. And then, of course, a couple other quick questions we'll be going over is, as people start to head back to the offices, how are we gonna meld working remotely with people back in the offices, and how will workflows be affected, and that whole sort of thing. And then there is the supply chain, which I think most people agree held up surprisingly well last year, despite some challenges. And there's more questions out there lurking. So we'll take a quick look at that. All right, so that's enough about me. I'm going to start introducing our panelists now by order of appearance. And first up, we're going to hear from Dominique Raccah. As you can see on the screen, is All Those Things at Sourcebooks, which she founded in 1987. And they publish now virtually every category. Sourcebooks has over 150 employees, publishes more than 400 new titles per year, and is the largest women-owned book publisher in the country. Dominique is widely recognized as an innovator in book publishing, and we're proud to say she was the 2016 PW Person of the Year. Following Dominique will be Cathy Felgar, who is Publishing Operations Director at Princeton University Press. She has operations, editorial, production, manufacturing, and system implementation experience in various positions with Macmillan, Columbia University Press, Harper, Cambridge University. Professional interests include capacity planning, workflow solutions, sustainability, and supply chain optimization. Lorraine Shanley will be third, and she's president of Market Partners International, media consultancy firm that specializes in book publishing. Clients include the largest US publishers, an international nonprofit, a major streaming video educational company, and UK-based publicity trade publisher. Shanley edits and writes for Publishing Trends and reviews for Kirkus, Book Reporter, and Audiophile. She's a member and past president of Women's Media Group. She's on the advisory board of NYU Center for Publishing and is a member of the Stationaries Company Communications and Contact Guild in London. And coming direct from London is Tom Chalmers. He's managing director of Legend Times, a group of companies he founded in 2005. He later launched Legend Business, a business book publisher, followed by New Generation Publishing, a self-publishing company. He also founded IPR License in 2012, a global rights licensing platform, which he sold in 2016. And finally, in 2019, Legend Times acquired University of Buckingham Press, and in 2020 launched Hero, a non-fiction book publisher. So I think we have the waterfront covered. And to start us off, Dominique, you are up.
Thank you very much, Jim, and it's amazing to be here with all of you, and but not in the way that we're used to being together at all, right? And Jim asked us to put together some thoughts about how our business is different today. And I think I want to point to 5 things that I think have really changed over the course of the last 15 months. The first, obviously, is simply the way that we're working together. Right? That's pretty obvious as we sit here in a Zoom call. Work from home and remote working environments are in fact normative at this point throughout the industry. And I think everyone in our company and in companies throughout our industry prioritized safety first. And we did a great job of really creating infrastructures that we didn't have before, so that we could actually communicate and work together in this new way. So I'm really proud of the work we did together, and really excited to be working this way. The second, which Jim also pointed to, is the shift to online. I think you've seen a shift in retailer partner dynamics, that with online becoming more dominant and brick and mortar in some cases still not back to pre-COVID levels. We've also seen a shift to direct to consumers. All of our retail partners that have .coms have associated numbers that are up in the double to triple digits. So a lot of growth in that environment from all of our retail partners, not just Amazon. So I think it's very important to say that to one another, because I think that's really interesting, including the growth of an entity that we didn't really talk about at the beginning of the year last year, which is bookshop.org, right? Brand new partner doing some great work in the indie space. Really excited to see, and really exciting development. That shift to online and that shift to remote created a tremendous opportunity for innovation. It was really good for entrepreneurs like Tom, like myself, like all of us, many of us on this call have exactly that background, which is that fluid, flexible agility that entrepreneurs are so gifted with. Well, I don't think we're gifted with it, but I think that we all work in this way, and it has been a tremendous opportunity for us to discover new ways of working with a number of our book selling partners, which I find. So for example, at Sourcebooks, we developed with Baker and Taylor, the Baker and Taylor book clubs. We developed new author models like the Bloom Books model that we're working with E.L. James. So a lot of new innovation in the space, which comes out of being in this situation. Some of the hardships of the past 15 months have been on the supply chain side. So I think Cathy is going to talk to that, and I suspect Lorraine may as well. But there have been no question that on the manufacturing side, we are still dealing with longer print cycles, the need to book press time, to buy paper earlier, and just in general, supply chain is just taking a lot longer. And obviously the supply chain internationally, and Tom will undoubtedly speak to this, is also a challenged environment. And we've seen because of that, we have seen serious growth in POD, and I think Cathy will be speaking to that a little bit later. So all of those three things clearly have occurred. The other thing that Jim pointed to, which we have absolutely experienced, is the discoverability issue with respect to online, and particularly and I'm not sure that the data is strictly about online. I think that American readers, at least, we're taking less risks with new authors and new books. And so there has been a consistent frontlist challenge, and backlist is up, whether you're looking at the industry or you're looking at Sourcebooks. Sourcebooks' backlist is up 74% year to date. I mean, it's just, these numbers are very, very large. And I think that is about people looking for books that they know, people looking for books that they're comfortable with, that they already are aware of. So a lot of growth in backlist, a lot of challenge in frontlist. And then, and I don't think we can talk about the last 15 months without mentioning the Black Lives Matter movement that has had such a profound impact on us as a society. And out of that came a reckoning for publishers to examine what we were doing and to encourage and promote diversity, both within our own lists and well as our own staffs. Diverse voices has always been an integral part of what we do at Sourcebooks. We're an indie press, we're an outsider press, so that's always been part of our mission. But we started building some new programs that I'm incredibly excited about, like our 10-week paid apprenticeship program, a BIPOC editorial training program for BIPOC candidates. We're now in our third course of that, which starts in May. Applications for the fall will open this summer. The reviews from the first two groups, which again, this is an agile kind of model, right? So we're testing, we're learning, we're changing, have been really positive and exciting. So, you know, we had a person say the Sourcebooks editorial training program is the most comprehensive editing training I've ever had. It's a must for BIPOC professionals interested in getting invaluable hands-on editing experience from leading industry experts. So this summer we'll also be unveiling an education program that showcases all of the opportunities within the publishing industry. I think this time became, at least for us, an opportunity for us to make changes that we thought could really benefit our employees, our authors, and our book selling partners. And so quite a lot has changed actually for us in the last 15 months. And very much leaning into the agility and flexibility that, you know, is the hallmark of indies like Sourcebooks. And I just want to say one more thing. There are, I think, 500 people on this call. Yep, indeed, 504. And I have to tell you, there were some really dark days, and I bet that's true for every one of you. There were some really dark days in that 15-month period. And the fact that we got to work on books, and that books mattered, and that people cared about books, and that books grew as an industry during this time was extraordinary and hugely inspirational. And I'm really grateful that we get to talk about that. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Dominique. That was terrific. All right, Cathy, the stage is yours.
Thank you, and thanks, Dominique. I'm going to echo some of the things that you said. So Princeton University Press publishes about 270 books a year, roughly half trade. Our main office is in Princeton, New Jersey, but we have smaller offices in the UK near Oxford and one in Beijing. So I would say overall business has been doing well despite the pandemic. After the first 2 months of the pandemic where we saw a drop in sales, the levels came back up and they've been good since then. We, especially with ebooks, we hope to see this as a permanent increase. As Dominique mentioned, our front list has been slightly soft, but the back list is doing very well. And again, ebooks are up and continue to stay up. So as Dominique mentioned, there are severe strains in the supply chain, particularly around domestic print capacity. I really think it's critical to work closely with printers now, and pre-scheduling titles has really never been more important. But it's almost gotten to the point where you have to pre-schedule them before they go into production, where you don't really know the page count. It's tough. But we've seen shortages with some binding materials and paper types, so I'm trying to standardize wherever possible, even though we have an extremely diverse list, including a lot of 4-color with odd trim sizes and a lot of co-publications. In the overseas printing area, we have a lot of delays with shipping and a lot of congestion at the ports. And domestically, we're seeing some shortages of trucking. So sometimes it's hard to get the books just into the warehouse, even once they've been printed. As Dominique mentioned, we're trying to maximize POD as much as possible, especially for printing closer to market. But even one of the largest vendors for POD was showing signs of capacity strain in the fall and through Christmas, and we were having really extended schedules there, especially in the hardcover area. PUP sales are about 20% from our UK office. And so we're running into problems there with Brexit, especially importing books from Europe to the UK. And then more locally, well, I would say some authors and peer reviewers have been struggling with pandemic and work from home conditions. And I've especially heard that this is more so the case with women than men, which is concerning. We have staff with children at home who've been facing strains, caring for their children with remote schooling. We're really concentrating on moving all our files for work in process into the cloud, and also on updating all laptops and equipment for all staff who are working remotely. We've been discussing a possible return to the office, perhaps for September, but I think we'll see increased flexibility is probably permanent or here to stay in some form, because we've managed to work so successfully for more than a year now, all remote. We're really emphasizing use of keywords for discoverability, like has already been mentioned. And we've had a couple of very successful website sales, and we're really trying to increase digital marketing. That's what I'll say to start. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, Lorraine, you're up.
Thank you. So I just wanted to go over some of the 2020 sales that haven't been touched on already. And, the obvious one, and actually PW, Jim just did an article on sales at the Big Five, which are really spectacular for 2020. But overall trade sales were up about 10%, ebook sales about 13%. Audiobook was up 17%, which is actually down from what it had been in the last couple of years, which was 25%. But what's interesting in audiobook is that the library usage has gone way up. And one publisher actually told us that if you put ebook and audiobook downloads together, it's about 50% of all downloads. So that's both on the sales side and the patron side, which was an unusual observation. But overall, audiobook in the library is up 20%. So that's audiobook sales to libraries. So, and also podcasts are way up, which some of us are more involved with than others. And I think increasingly, in the same way that Spotify has gotten into audiobooks, publishers will do more and more with podcasts. And the blurring line between what is an audiobook, a book, a podcast is constantly evolving. So the big winners were children's nonfiction, YA fiction, comic, manga, graphic novels, way up. And as Dominique and Cathy both mentioned, direct to consumer is way up. Google had, I think it was Google and Amazon had a 50% increase in search over the last year. What is also interesting is that there's this sort of rise in book club, and not just, in your home book club or nowadays Zoom book club, but there's a well-funded book club. It's called Book Club, is launching imminently. Book of the Month Club is doing extraordinarily well. And lest you think that's the Book of the Month Club of your parents or grandparents, the actual target is millennial women. So very different from what it used to be, different mechanisms, and very impressive sales. And the other interesting area of clubs is Epic, which is, I'm sure Dominique, you know very well. It's a direct-to-consumer subscription model, and their audience has increased to 50 million over the last year. So it's a real contender. So the other thing I wanted to talk about, but actually I realized before I do that, I do want Nicole, if you have that one slide, because I do think it's a nice way to sort of end the conversation about trade sales. This is from NPD. And you'll see in the corner, the little blue, right by the cross, there's books, and books is in the most important quadrant of all, which is the remain sticky quadrant. NPD's happy word is sticky. So that means, you know, you just constantly refer to them, you want them around you. And so that's a great thing for all of us to take home with us. But the thing I want to mention before I finish is one trend, yes, is direct to consumer book clubs. The other big trend is the change in human resource departments. They've gone from being personnel departments to human resource, and now they're really considered business partners of C-suites. And one of the interesting things is, you know, if you think about what they've been doing, they've been having to deal with virtual employee issues. They've had to deal with online training. They've had to do with virtual onboarding, virtual recruiting and onboarding. They've had to deal with one of the big issues, you know, in a recent survey is employee well-being and mental health, which 80% of employees say is the most important thing they're dealing with in HR. And, you know, there are areas that are where this is becoming critical for any company. And I think we should really appreciate, I'm actually, part of my work is recruiting, and I often work with HR people. And I have to say, they are sort of the unsung heroes of the business world at the moment. So, and they're also recruiting, HR has become one of the hottest areas to go into, because rather than being task oriented, it's become a much more robust area with a lot more issues having to deal that it deals with, including, of course, the recruiting, diverse recruiting in 2020 and 2021 has become immensely important. So those are some of the trends that I see. And now I'm going to turn it back to Jim. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Lorraine. All right, Tom, the view from the UK and elsewhere.
No, thanks, Jim. That's quite a big one to answer. But it's yeah. So from our perspective, and kind of as a short headline summary of how we found the last year, as Jim mentioned, we took into investment in the business and we acquired an academic first step into the academic world in 2019, and then we also launched a non-fiction list in the start of 2020. And we had a big I've created a big 5-year plan called 2020 plan, which ended after about 2 months, and then we had to replan everything. So it's been a big challenge, but ultimately, as others have mentioned, where there have been some short-term hits, there's actually been areas of longer-term growth that is kind of quite exciting, and I think will stay beyond the time now. In terms of the so guess bit by bit, in terms of the trade list, it's been very similar to what, as Dominique said, which is the growth in backlist has probably been the most notable side. So whereas we used to sell 65% front list to 35% backlist, that's literally exactly swapped around in the last year. So we're now selling pretty much just short of 65% backlist as opposed to front list. And I think that's a different challenge in a way for big publishers and for smaller presses, because big publishers have a certain size where for smaller presses, obviously, it changes the way you treat those backlists. So in a way, you almost have less of a differentiation between front and backlist. I think it's also flipped around a bit the traditional publicity marketing cycle, that traditionally you would publicize the key titles and then kind of marketing would then take them on. Now, by its nature, particularly with online sales, which are much less tied to pub date, we find marketing is actually a kind of constant presence all the way through, and it's actually publicity which picks up on marketing for the bigger titles. So it's kind of flipped that side round and more, and we've certainly put a lot more investment in the way we market online and advertise books. That's been very different. Obviously, the bookshop side here in the UK, it disappeared completely when the shutdown happened last March. So we, it was literally down over 95% at one point in March. And then it came back in the summer when we started to see reopenings. And then in the UK, we went into a second lockdown, pretty much fully locked down from January. So we see that fall back again. So at best last year for us, it came up to about 50% and then it's dropped down again. I think realistically, it's going to be a steady incremental growth, but we also, as Dominique and Cathy mentioned, we've seen a lot of innovative things from bookshops and outlets, and actually the drop in sales hasn't been as big here in the second lockdown as it was in the first lockdown, and part of that is the way they've increased their online, whether online sales or different activities or webinars or events. So I think I think that market will come back, but in a slightly different way. In terms of our academic list, likewise, most places books sales on the academic side has been challenging because most of the traditional market, education, as you know, a lot of it's been shut down, or obviously budgets and various. I think just dealing with providing education has been the biggest challenge for the education sector. Never mind kind of the publishing side, but what we have seen growth is in our journal side, which we've doubled the number of journals we've published, and actually the demand for research has never been greater, and that's the side we're seeing. So our actual journal revenues have actually, they're new because we only bought the press in 2019, but over doubled last year. There's various things within that beyond this call, which is the kind of open access and transformative agreements, and the move towards, particularly the pandemic has sped up the demand for have availability for research for obvious reasons. So that's pushed that down the line. And again, there's differences between different countries. Like I know in the US, a lot of the push is more towards green open access, whereas in the UK, it tends to be more the transformative agreements. Cathy will know this far better than me, but it's so yeah, that's whole research side has been a huge learning curve for me, which has been very interesting. And yeah, the one other side to mention briefly is which kind of is the Brexit side, which is specifically relevant to us in the UK, as it was ideally timed just as we entered on first. Our latest lockdown was also for Brexit to happen. After a kind of quiet first month, we've seen a big hit. We're starting to see the impact on the supply chain. As Dominique mentioned, we're seeing pretty much twice as long lead times for most things in the production chain in terms of printing delivery. That has increased where we print in Europe. So we've had deliveries tied up for a week in customs and extra paperwork and all these type of things, which is adding extra time into the chain. So I don't necessarily think there's an easy answer to that, apart from trying to build in some extra time. And it's a pity because it's a barrier to trade, obviously particularly to trade in Europe, but it's something we're probably going to have to ride out and hope it improves. And I guess the final point on that side, on the kind of availability, as mentioned from POD, is that data has become, data. It took publishers quite a long time in some ways. Some were better than others. I know Sourcebooks were particularly strong on data, and something we always looked up to, and from what we've done is the kind of metadata and that side of data, but actually the next stage of data is actually in availability. It's in kind of the actual availability in those markets, because travel restrictions, logistical restrictions are probably going to be here for the next few years. So actually by using data not just as a passive thing, but actually as a physical thing within different countries, within kind of availability, that side of stuff is going to be the kind of next key side of publisher data. And particularly where the market's going, availability is going to be a bigger challenge than it has been before to cross off between to balance out the logistical challenges. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of enough for me for now, but I think I think ultimately the headline doesn't cover all the many challenges within it, but I think the pandemic has kind of catapulted. It's created some temporary changes, but it's also catapulted most industries further down the road for good and bad reasons. And I think that's also forced us to make some of the changes we probably should have made or were going to make quicker. So, I think as it's gone on, we've despite the challenges, we kind of feel increasingly confident about the future. And it's exciting that publishing's come through it as it has, as Dominique says, is a very motivating thing. But that's enough for me anyway, so I'll go over to you.
Well, before we let you go completely, Tom, do you think you have good visibility on where Brexit is going to take you, or is it still really kind of changing week by week or day by day?
I mean, personally, I kind of took the wrong approach of towards the end of last year. I tried to ignore it while I was dealing with a pandemic, and then it arrived, and now we're seeing the impact. I think it's so politicalized, and it's difficult to really understand that. I certainly think both sides, or certainly from our side, we have a government in that, without getting political, have a government in that championed Brexit. So in a way, they're trying to, make out it's as positive as possible, and even kind of hide it behind other news at times, rather than kind of push the challenges down the side. I think particularly with the challenges and in the pandemic, and the perspective of all the wider challenges, I think there is probably more of a positivity, hopefully, on all sides to make it as smooth as possible. But I think realistically, we're looking at probably 2 years of logistical challenges, I would have thought, before it starts to. I mean, I'm not particularly informed, but that would be my guess. It's going to be a while before it settles down, and I think it'll settle down a little bit, and then there'll be new challenges that come up as people fall out, or rules change, or different cases come up. So I think it will be a bit up and down. So I don't think it will. It's basically a barrier for trade, I think, that will present a challenge for the next couple of years, I would have thought.
All right. And one final thing maybe on Brexit in terms of publishing directly, and how is it affecting the different trading partners? Is it mostly an issue with Europe, or is it the United States as well?
I mean, we're early into it, and the main issues we've seen is in Europe. I mean, I've only focused on the logistical side. There's a huge bigger side in terms of recruitment and talent and authors, and there's a whole bigger side which is kind of too big for this. But I know, speaking to some partners outside, some Indian partners in the US, I know it seems to be cropping up more and more in conversation that it is a bit of a challenge. And the problem is, for us, is people will do trade with other people because it's less hassle. We get told directly by European customers that we want to do that, but frankly, it's just easier to order stock from here or whatever it is. So yeah, wish it hadn't happened, but trying to make the best of it would be my summary.
Okay, all right, great. All right, Dominique, I saw you frowning on the mention of Brexit. So what's your relationship been like since it started kicking?
I think, like as Tom said, that certainly creates supply side challenges. You've seen some customers actually shut down ordering. Some customers have shut down shipping. Some customers. I mean, it's been an interesting evolution from the U.S. And certainly, as Tom said, I think it's going to take a couple of years to sort itself out.
Okay, all right, great. All right, before we have lots of questions that were pre-submitted. One I'm gonna start off with, and then we'll open up to some others. We have a question here: is the informal learning arena one with long-term growth? And I think we're talking here just about workbooks, activity books, and nonfiction, basically children's nonfiction. And that was, one of the big winners last year. I think that had the highest unit sales growth of all the major categories of book scan tracks. But interestingly, it was also one of the first ones to benefit from, if you will, benefit from the lockdowns last year and the school closings in particular, when parents out there were panicked about what are they going to do at home. So that went way up. But in the last couple of weeks, based on the book scan data, the sales there have actually gone down in 2021 compared to 2020 at this time. And while it's still higher than it was in 2019, and I think that market will continue to stay robust. I don't think we're going to see the type of growth we saw last year in that category. And I think it does point up to some of those other challenges that some of the publishers are looking at. How can we replicate what happened last year? And we'll see how that plays out over the course of the year. Lorraine, you and I both know there's not a tremendous amount of great data on what consumers are going to do, but if you had to take, I guess, in terms of, will the reading habits stay ingrained, or will, it start to lose some of its traction now that when other things start to reopen? Do you think that's a realistic possibility, and how impactful will it be?
Just reading habits in general?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I actually do. I mean, all the stats seem to point to that, and even McKinsey did a study where they said that at least 11% of online reading and ebook purchasing will continue going forward. So I think as people get used to buying online, get used to downloading from their libraries, there will be a continuation. Now, whether there is a continuation in particularly the children's market, the workbook market, everybody has their theories. I think actually BookScan thinks that market will continue. It's hard to imagine it will. By the same token, cookbooks may have peaked. Certainly fitness has peaked. We've all been through that and moved on. But I think a lot of it is anybody's guess. I would say generally, though, the market in 2021 will be strong. I said it. There you go.
and we're going to print it. So we'll see how that works out. And this is a question that we've received ahead of time, and I see it's up here now. Maybe Dominique and maybe Cathy, you could address it anytime over in the UK. So have frontlist books received fewer ad promotional dollars opportunities due to the pandemic? And is that one reason readers might be turning to backlist books? Dom, you want to go first?
Sure. No. So there have been, I think, obviously, there have been certain kinds of promotions that have disappeared. And the most notable of those would be, at least to my mind, trade shows, which I saw Kevin posted a question about. And I have to admit, I never thought I'd say this out loud, but I honestly miss the Frankfurt Book Fair. I know, Jim, it's like I'm shocked myself. I miss seeing Lorraine at Book Expo, and it's just like really trade shows, ALA, this is definitely a thing that we're missing right now. But in terms of advertising dollars, I think we're actually spending more. The online platforms require a certain, I would say, amount of advertising spend, and we're watching a lot of different kinds of digital dollars, digital players evolving, and we're certainly engaged with, I think, everyone. So I think actually we're spending quite a lot on front list. My guess would be that the cost per front list launch dollar has probably increased. That would be my bet that that's true. And what we're seeing is just that retail, brick and mortar retail, is an easier, and we've known this all along, is an easier and more appropriate discovery mechanism.
Tom, how's that playing out in the UK?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. We actually, as Dominique says, we actually spend more on front list titles than we have been doing. I think where the big shift is actually online sales give much more of the power to the customer rather than the curator. So what we're actually seeing is where titles are building momentum, which is driven by that ad spend, building up customer reviews and word of mouth and that side of stuff, which happens online. We're seeing the growth in sales. So I think it's actually not a move in advertising spend. It's a move in who's making the decisions on buying the books and what's popular and not. And I think while that sits more with the customer, particularly via all the online platforms and and outside of them, review sites, peer review sites, I think that's generating the growth in backlist sales. It's created a pure cycle of review, word of mouth, and purchase. That's where the backlist growth is coming from, not so much in the ad spend. Well, from our side, we feel now we need to make the ad spend in order to get the snowball rolling into that next stage, rather than selling what it is now, if that makes some sense. So it's interesting.
Yeah, I agree with Tom. And the other thing that we haven't mentioned yet, I do want to mention is TikTok. So unbelievably, if you have not seen the TikTok effect on YA, for example, young adult titles, it's significant and making a huge difference.
All right, very cool. Cathy, anything on the Princeton perspective on ad dollars for the front list?
It's not something I study at work, but my sense is that we spend just as much advertising front list. And I was thinking maybe it has to do with buying behavior around author events. Like if you're going in person to see an author, maybe you're more likely to buy the book there and then than you are on an online event. I don't know.
Okay, great. Well, while we have you, here's another question that appeared both on some of the pre questions as well as what you're getting now, and Cathy, so we'll start there. In terms of domestic printing, are you trying to bring back more printing from overseas, and how do you assess the health of the domestic market for the time being?
Well, I think that there are quite a few printers closed in the last, 10 years in the US, and we're finally seeing the risk that was inherent in that all along. I think that printers had forced to get bigger for the most part to survive, because as a printer, you have to keep investing in the technology to stay up to date. And some of the smaller ones just couldn't. I hope the capacity grows. PUP is definitely doing a lot of simultaneous US UK printings so we can maintain a global pub date. And we're doing more POD. I'm trying to find more printers, to be honest with you, and I'm looking more in Canada and in Mexico, and it's definitely a problem.
Dominique, what's your view of that, Dominique?
Cathy said that so wisely. I have to say, we are paying for some short-sightedness that we had in the past, and I am really hoping that we are going to see people invest and grow printing businesses, hopefully in the United States as well as overseas. So that is certainly a hope of mine, because this constraint that we are all operating under, look, you can't do the amount of growth that we're projecting as an industry and then cut back on the supply side. I mean, just the math doesn't work. So we're going to have to make these things balance out.
Right. Okay. And before we leave trade shows altogether, I'm just going to do a quick poll. Whoever's not muted right now. So Dominique, I'll start with you. Will you be sending anybody in person, do you think, to any trade shows in 2021, either domestically or overseas?
No, I don't. It's a little bit early to commit to this. So thanks, Jim, for asking. But my point of view at this point is we will keep every single person safe. So probably not. I have trouble imagining it.
Okay. All right, Tom, what do you think over in the UK?
Yeah, similarly. I mean, for us, if London happens and it's, you know, it's pretty much just down the road from us, and if staff want to go for it, then, you know, and want to go for it, we'll kind of leave it up to their choice. Then, you know, we'll probably have some people there, but internationally, not at the moment, I don't think. I mean, even aside from, you know, anything else, the quarantine and restrictions and different stuff, it's like everything in a pandemic, it kind of changes quickly, but not at this point. I think we'll probably revisit it towards the end of the year.
And Cathy, has Princeton issued any guidelines on what travel might be?
Not expecting any travel for the rest of the calendar year, to my knowledge.
Lorraine, you going anywhere? And what have you heard from people here?
You're muted.
Muted. What happened?
You're still muted.
Okay, here we go.
There you go.
I've basically heard the same thing. Nobody's going anywhere unless it's on vacation. And part of the problem, I would think, with trade shows, I mean, it's certainly been the case with Bologna and Frankfurt over the last year, is if you can't get a critical mass, it's not worth going. I mean, if you're going to be sitting in your booth alone in a vast expanse, it's not that attractive. So you really have to have everybody come together or not do it.
Right, and I think that's a great point. And Lorraine, while we have you, you had mentioned HR, and you had that great post about the different things they're doing. Have you gleaned anything on what people are actually doing to try to maintain company culture and build morale? I mean, I know at PW we have Zoom Fridays and other things like that. Is there anything more sophisticated than that going on?
Most of the stuff I've heard is basically either holidays or, you know, no email days, and basically trying to keep people from working too hard. There was a study done by Harvard Business School at the beginning, the first few months of the pandemic, that people were working, I think, 8.5% more a day than they had previously. And you think about that without vacations over 14 months, and you realize that burnout is, you understand why mental health and mental and physical health are the top of everyone's list of issues that have to be resolved.
Right, okay. Dominique, I mean, anything in particular you've done?
Totally in agreement with Lorraine, and I think we need to have more fun. So I know that this platform is not perfect for fun, but we've got to create it. So we, for example, this week we'll be giving out a set of wacky awards, which I have no idea what they are because nobody has told me what they are. So I will just, but I do think that we're missing connection, and that you can feel it in people, that we really yearn for it. And so creating mechanisms for that, whether we're doing it however you want to do it, we need to create that.
Okay. Okay, so also, Dominique, can I pick on you one more time? You have any sense of when, you know, book tours might go back to in person, and how has virtual actually worked, do you think, these virtual book tours? I mean, I know it generates a lot more people usually attending an author event, but does that translate into sales? Or would you be happy with that?
I don't think it translates into sales well. And I think that's a consistent message that we have pretty much from everyone that I've talked to. And I don't know if Lorraine has different information, but it's pretty challenging. And I think it's challenging for authors. I think they, I think, look, we're all in the business. All of us, we're in a service business. Our job is to take care of our authors and our authors' careers. So not in love with this methodology for book tours. I think we got to come up with new ideas. We've got a really new idea that we're going to try out for E.L. James that you guys will hear about in May sometime. that I'm wild about, that I'm really excited about. But we've got to keep experimenting and doing new things, because what we've got right now, I don't think is quite working as well as we had hoped. Lorraine, you may have a different, I don't know if you've got different info.
No, I've actually been hearing the same thing, that where author tours, Zoom tours were very successful at the beginning. Now they've really petered out and the sales are minimal. I do think, and I'd be interested in your take on the children's model of a group of authors touring schools, which they've now translated to Zoom. Is there an adult author version of that could kind of keep the dynamic going? So it's not just one author and an audience, but there's a conversation.
Yeah, we did one of that. We did a couple of those that, again, early on worked really, really well. Like, so you had, 400 or 500 people. It's not looking like that yet right now, despite our best efforts. But I think there's more to try. I think this is really about continuing to innovate, right? And continuing to come up with new ideas and new ways of doing it. The format is a bit limiting, so I think platform will matter too.
Yeah, I think I was going to say from us, I think one of the things that's always been frustrating about, or not frustrating, but at times of publishing, ever since I started, kind of there's a lot of things that have always the way they've always been. And, as Dominique said, and she's someone I've always looked up to as being entrepreneurial and kind of new ideas, is that, this kind of crisis, although terrible for, so there's so many challenges and things within it, it is a time for innovation and trying new things. And I think those who can try new things quickly, and I think things like book tours and that kind of thing were already not completely creaking, but weren't what they were originally. And I think there's going to be lots of different versions, whether there's some kind of, hybrid events, like we can have this event and there's, hundreds of people on the line, is there a mix between the physical and that? And I think there's going to be lots of interesting models. I think it's a good time to try new stuff. And I think there will also be an appetite from all retailers and elsewhere to try new stuff. So I think it's going to be good. I think if we talk again in a year, I think book publicity models will look very different for new titles.
Right. We're running out of time. I would like to try to squeeze in this last question from an author. And it says here, how should authors be shifting their own creative process and marketing efforts to align with the shifts publishers are experiencing on their own? So I'm wondering, Dominique, if you could have you had any changes in signing authors and what's expected of them going forward?
No, I think if anything, so no, I don't see a big shift there. But what this author is pointing to is a really interesting question, right? I think the question that this person is asking is do we need to rethink if the world that we are living in, it has moved from 65% front list to 65% backlist, then the fundamental infrastructure that we've all built into our businesses needs to shift to represent that. So we need to, and that includes the efforts that we ask from our authors. We need to be talking to our authors in different ways and asking different things from them. So that's the question. I think that's fundamental. And I don't know whether we have data on that. I certainly don't. I don't know whether the shift that we're looking at is going to be an ongoing one, or whether we're going to go back to having the same frontlist momentum we've had in the past.
So Cathy, from an academic author standpoint, is anything changing that you can tell or need to change?
I would say, to Dominique's point, keyword enrichment of the backlist is going to be important. And in terms of author behavior, you know, I have a lot of sympathy for authors trying to get their manuscripts in the modern climate. And I would also say, if you have a topic relevant to the pandemic about plagues, that's the thing.
Hey, I think that's a nice pitch to end on. And once again, this is Jim Milliot, editorial director for PW. And I think, Tyler, I'm doing the send off.
I'll take care of that part, Jim.
Okay,
Thank you.
all right, thank
I want
you.
to thank each of the panelists for their generous time. I know we ran a little bit over, and we got almost 100 questions in, so I know there was no way we could have addressed all of the questions today. We'll do our best to address the commonalities and any follow-up. There will be a copy of this presentation, the PowerPoint, as well as the video of today's webinar sent to all attendees. And Publishers Weekly will also be doing a write-up about the key topics and trends that were shared today. If you have any questions at all, feel free to drop me an email at the address on the screen. I'm certainly happy to follow up about anything that came up during the webinar itself. Or, of course, if you're curious to talk about editorial and production services provided by Westchester Publishing Services. You will receive a survey after the webinar today. Again, you don't have to write this down. We'll send you a copy of that in our follow-up. But as you close out of the Zoom, you should be directed to this page. Feel free to fill in the survey with any thoughts about today's webinar, any other questions, or other information that's requested. So thank you very much, everybody, for attending today. Thank you very much to our panelists, to PW for co-hosting this. And maybe we'll do this again next year. We'll keep it going as a third annual event. We'll see.
Thank you, everybody. That was
Thank you.
awesome. Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.